Now, for the view from Beijing, here's a quick glance at Chinese media. An article on Xi Jinping's economic thought strikes an assertive tone on trade tensions with the United States. It frames the tariff spat as among the tough battles and protracted wars China must endure to make the economy stronger. It says China will fight to the end and quotes Xi Jinping's call for party members to, quote, enhance the sense of crisis, carry forward the spirit of struggle, and improve the ability to fight.
Just glancing at the Global Times this morning, well, the take there is that the U.S. should not be surprised by moves out of China. An editorial, they're blaming Washington for this recent escalation, pointing to this series of restrictions and tariff threats after those talks, of course, in Madrid. Now, it says it says the U.S. overestimated its leverage while, quote, underestimating China's capacity for counteraction and its strategic composure. Let's take you now straight to Shanghai and bring in our next guest. Wu Xinbo is the director of the Center for American Studies at Fudan University. He's also an advisor to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Professor, thank you so much for the time. I wanted to start off with the theoretical end and outcome, and maybe we can reverse engineer and work backwards here. Do you think a meeting between the two presidents is confirmed or is set to take place in 2 weeks' time? Can we start off there and then we'll work backward?
Well, theoretically, a meeting between two leaders is still possible. And I think both sides have interest in pursuing this in-person meeting between two leaders for the first time since the second Trump administration. However, we need to work hard to improve the situation so that the meeting will be fruitful, not just a photo opportunity.
Right. So when we've been looking up at the lead up to this potential meeting, a lot of the narrative has been that each side has been trying to build up their own leverage. So then they have room to negotiate based on their perceived positions of strength. From your perspective as an academic and also an advisor to those in the foreign ministry, do you feel one side might be building or overplaying their hand too much or building too much reliance on their leverage?
That's a good question. I mean, if you look at the U.S.-China trade and economic relations, how they have evolved over the last couple of years. The U.S. side started with the unprecedented tariff war on China from the first Trump administration, and then moved to the tech war on China, especially during the Biden administration. Now, during the second Trump administration, the tariff war was relaunched again, and with more Chinese enterprises have been put on the entity list, have been sanctioned by the U.S. side. So if you follow the developments, it has been the U.S. who has been keep pushing China, building pressure on China, overplay its card on China, weaponize the interdependence between two countries. So finally, it forced China to fight back, to retaliate. So back to September 19th, when President Xi and President Trump had a phone conversation, basically, I think that conversation was quite constructive. But only 10 days later, the U.S., Commerce, the BIS, come up with a new rule, 50% rule, which actually will put thousands of more Chinese enterprises on the entity list. So there's a huge impact, not only on the Chinese enterprises, on Chinese economy, but more importantly, it raises the issue on the Chinese side whether the U.S. is serious about, forging some consensus in the forthcoming summit and step by step to improve trade relations with China, or the U.S. side, within the Trump administration, was simply divided, with some pragmatists who wanted to improve relations with China. But then you have the hawkish people, they never want to, have a normal relation with China. They want to push for strategic decoupling. They want to derail this relationship. So I think this issue has to be put in a broader context.
Professor, what gets us back on track in terms of good faith, good spirits ahead of the meeting. Do we need to see gestures from both sides, an off-ramp into the meeting? So in other words, what I'm trying to get to is specifically, do you think the Chinese are expecting the U.S. president to remove the threat of tariffs in order to prove that good faith?
Well, I think the first step is for the U.S. side to scale back the new rule, the 50% new rule, on the Chinese enterprises that the BS come up on September 29th. So, and then let's go back to the recent round of talks, the moderate talks, the agreement achieved at the talks, and also the spirit two leaders agreed upon when they had the phone conversation on September 19th. So as for the new tariff on China, I think Trump he changes always. Sometimes he say this may happen, sometimes he hope that doesn't have to happen. So that's not already in place. But what has been announced by the U.S. side is September 29th new rule, the 50% regulation.
Yeah.
I think that is important for the U.S. to scale back.
Professor Wu, let me just play the devil's advocate a little bit here and ask your opinion on whether you feel that the Chinese government might be overplaying its hand a little bit right now. That's something that's come out of Washington, that essentially they thought they had some sort of agreement on the relaxation of the export curbs on rare earth metals and magnets. And then China now has taken a much more assertive position in between the rounds of trade talks by talking about more strict control. Granted, China's trying to gain some leverage ahead of the next round of talks, ahead of any kind of summit. But are they potentially overplaying their hand in an assertive way that could also make other nations outside of the United States more angry and disrupt supply chains? We're seeing the G7 finance ministers meeting in Washington, D.C., where they're going to be talking about their own reaction to China's actions on rare earths.
Well, 2 points. First, over whether this is overplayed or not. Well, that depends on whether China can, effectively force the U.S. to scale back. Again, is September 29th BIS new rule. So anything that can get the U.S. to cancel this latest pressure on China will be necessary. So that's point one. Point two, regarding broader ramifications of China's recent export control policy, I think most countries know this is not particularly targeted on them. It is mainly a retaliation to the U.S. moves on China. So if these countries, they handle relations with China, especially trade and economic relations with China, well, without assisting the U.S. in sanctioning China, in pursuing the export control of China, I think they don't have to worry about this. So basically, this actually gives China more leverage in making sure other U.S. allies will not jump aboard to help the U.S. in pressuring China. I think China knows how to play the card wisely.
How about the soybean issue? Obviously, it's hit hard at the base of the voting base, if you will, in the Midwest of the United States. China has not bought a single crop order from this current crop for a month and a half into that. Is that an area where you feel, because China does need to import crops of soybean, that is an area of leverage that China could perhaps be amenable to buying or pledging to buy? Or has China already pretty much shifted all of its orders this season to Argentina, to Brazil? And how important of leverage is this?
I think the soybean issue is also part of China's leverage in dealing with Donald Trump's new tariff on China. So if two sides during the next trade talks can agree to address the tariff issue, then it is possible China may reconsider to purchase more U.S. agricultural products. So again, this is, It is important to the U.S., we understand, but the tariff is also important to China. So we have to address each other's legitimate concern so that we can have a win-win situation. So that is an issue that can be negotiable.
Okay. The U.S. Secretary Scott Bessent mentioned that we're effectively operating on sort of the rolling over of these 90-day truces, these extensions, if you will. And we're obviously, markets, businessmen, investors, newsrooms around the world are fixated now in this last week of October, when that is when the next, of course, meeting and hopefully the last deadline is going to be taking place. But in your view, Professor, do you think we still should consider another extension of these talks beyond October?
Well, I think the another extension is the minimum. But what I expect is something more than that. I mean, if two leaders meet, they should not just agree, let's, extend this for another 90 days. They should make the decision, to solve the tariff issue. Whether this is going to be totally removed, as the Chinese side suggests, because this is a unilateral tariff, illegal, or it will be 10% or 15%, then that will be reciprocal. I think the two leaders, if they meet, first and foremost, they should make decision on the tariff issue, rather than leaving this to future for another 90 days or 100 days, because the business community in both countries and broadly, they don't like uncertainty. They want a clear message from both sides. And also, I believe at this stage, China and the U.S. should be ready and prepared to put an end to the tariff issue. To some extent, the U.S. side, Donald Trump himself, should now understand the limit of his tariff cut on China. He has overplayed it, and it has been counterproductive. It has been hurting both sides, and the U.S. side even more so. If you look at the inflation rate coming back in the U.S., so it's time to put an end to the tariff cut. Of course, China and the U.S. will continue to struggle on other fronts, but tariff, to some extent, is an cut that should be discarded, in my opinion.
Professor, we've heard consistently and constantly from the Chinese side the request for respect, to be treated on equal grounds. We've heard consistently as well from the Chinese side that China does not want to get into this, but will fight, of course, if pushed. Do you think if they don't agree to terms, is China prepared to walk away from the table, you think?
I think China, we try to work for a good situation, a win-win outcome, but we have to prepare for a worst-case scenario. I think that has been the case since the beginning of the second Trump administration. If you look back, the earlier crossfire between two sides over tariff issue. So China didn't beg for negotiation. And every time when we sit down for negotiation, if no agreement could be achieved, we can walk away without any agreement. So that's something we can accept. We don't beg for negotiation. We don't beg for talk. We don't beg for achievements. But if you have the willing to strike a deal, we are prepared.